Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Barry Kaspinski, president of Artist Talk on Art, ATOA. ATOA is a nonprofit. We've been around since 1975. All our talks have been live since 1975 in the Lower West Side of New York City. As a result of COVID, we've gone to this format where we do Zoom presentations. It has been an odd windfall. In the past, when we were 8 times a year, and then 20 times a year. Now we meet 50 times a year. And as well, we have people coming from all the continents, different time zones, different days. And, you know, it's terrible when you have something good come from something bad, but at least we formed a way for people to meet, to gather, and to share and talk about art. Again, we're a 501c3. All of our talks are free. We welcome contributions. Our website lists all the various ways that you can contribute, and also shows art for sale show that we have up as well. So I want to welcome you all. Tonight, we have a unique presentation. We have Jaclyn Cedar, who is a gallerist with, I'm forgetting the name of the Good Naked Gallery, and also an artist. And tonight she's presenting as an artist and part of, and actually the sole artist in the show at Shelter Gallery, the show called Nightmoves. We have Rachel Cohen with us, the gallerist, and Rachel will dialogue back and forth with Jaclyn. We're up for an exciting time. Jaclyn's crew of artists are quite impressive. They have presented twice for ATOA talks and really blew the crowd away. And I think it's important to note, an artist gallerist with a good eye is quite valuable, not only for the artists they bring together, but sort of, you know, for their own work. And I applaud you, Jaclyn, for what you do for other artists. We had a group not too long ago, 6 artist gallerists talk, and they talked about their role, how their time in the gallery maybe takes away from their time as an artist. I'm sure some of these things will be addressed, but either way, it's nice to be an artist, see an artist be selfless and do so much for others. And at the same time, Jaclyn is constantly exhibiting around the country and is really, you know, knocking it out of the park as an artist. So great to have you here. I'm gonna hand it off to Rachel Cohen. Rachel will do a little introduction about herself, her gallery, and then dive into the specifics of Jaclyn. So welcome, Rachel.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. Feel like I'm part of a community. It's always so exciting. So yes, this has been, Jackie's show is our last of the year. It's been a very interesting couple of years. So Shelter is a contemporary art gallery. We're located in Chinatown. And I opened August 2019. So I had about like 6 months of kind of getting, you know, my footing, and then COVID. So, you know, like Jackie's gallery, we've learned to, you know, be more nimble kind of in the online space, in shows elsewhere, and sharing spaces with people. So we've made it. That's what I'm like, I made it this far. So Shelter, what we try to focus on is artists who, as I say it, have been traditionally left out of the art historical mainstream. So that's kind of a mouthful to say almost everyone. We're talking women, queer artists, artists of color, artists with disabilities. I represent about 15 artists who are part of a program called L.A.N.D Gallery, which is for artists with developmental disabilities, located in Brooklyn. So our roster really seeks to not just show, but also represent artists who, because of whatever reason, you know, often get kind of left out of, you know, major conversations. Larry Gagosian is not visiting that studio. You know, they have no way of connecting. So that, you know, that doesn't mean that I don't show, you know, people from everywhere in all walks of life, but that is our focus. The reason that is our focus is I trained as an art therapist and worked as an art therapist for several years, with artists with developmental disabilities, with artists who were homeless or, close to homeless, kind of across the board. And what I kept seeing was really talented people who just had no connection to this idea of what they could do with their art, and also what happened once they finished making their art. If they wanted to show it or if they wanted to sell it, it was like a foreign concept. So that's sort of how I approach art therapy, which really kind of like meshed well with opening my own gallery. I also hope to be again museum educator, which is how I met Jackie at MoMA. That was, yet again, kind of a way to focus on MoMA as this wonderful, valuable resource, but also one that is kind of meant to make a certain group of visitors comfortable in our programs. We typically worked with people who never would have come to the museum except for what we did. So, I think that it's one of those things, it's like an empathy and a consciousness that is kind of lacking in a lot of galleries. Not good naked. They're great. But, that's sort of what my goal is. And so being able to show Jackie and being able to show other educators is another really important thing that I'm looking forward to this upcoming year. So yeah, I believe I could keep talking about myself, but I won't do that. So Jackie's show. So Nightmoves, I guess we talked about it for quite some time. I, in addition to knowing Jackie and loving her work, have also been a collector of various artists from her gallery. So I highly recommend, looking at that work. And what I really loved about Jackie is that her work had this, there was a humorous sort of aspect to it, but there was also, I think, a kind of hidden, or I don't want to say darkness, because sometimes that just takes on a whole different meaning. But there was a lot going on in what could be considered some, very, approachable artwork. And I loved her scale. Everything that I knew was huge that she was painting, which is not easy. Going back to our storage, and and that whole aspect of things. We did a group show at Shelter a few months ago, and Jackie featured some of her colored pencil drawings, which were about the size of the works in the show, about 9 by 12, I think. And a work on paper, that colored pencil is great on that scale, right? You can really kind of dive into it. And then was it our last studio visit, maybe before the show? And she had like all these little pieces that she had been working on, these little paintings. And it was like my heart stopped. They're just gorgeous. And so then we decided to kind of go that way for this show. It's a little different than what we had shown of hers before, a little different than some of the other work that she's shown, given the scale. And that's how Nightmoves came to be. Jackie, what am I missing?
No, that's great. I can continue. I can pull up some images while we're talking if you like.
Yes, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful introduction. Thank you both. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having us, Barry, and thank you, Rachel, for moderating. It's so exciting to get to show work out in the world. As you all know, as artists, it's like the most amazing thing to have your work move outside of the studio and into a space where people can really process it and have a dialogue with you and what you're thinking about and making. So I feel so excited to have my work up at Shelter right now. And I really feel privileged to have the evening to talk to you all about what I've been thinking about. And since I know that I am talking to a group of artists, I prepared a slightly different presentation to really reveal a lot of my process going into the making of this body of work, because it happened over a fairly short period of time and it's a lot of work and a little bit different from what I've done in the past. So I'll just pull up some images and we can talk. Is everyone able to hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Okay, great. So I'll share my screen, and you know, this is a small group, so we can be casual and feel free to just jump in, or if I don't see someone raising their hand, feel free to just unmute and let me know if I'm missing anyone. But so just so you have a visual, my name is Jaclyn Cedar, and the title of my exhibition is Nightmoves at Shelter Gallery. It's open through December 22nd. And so if you do have a chance, if you're in New York City and you have a chance to go, I hope you'll visit and see the works in person. But I'll give you an introduction to the show. And these are the Instagram handles if you want to follow either of us in my website. So I'll pull that up at the end as well. Okay, so I'm going to show you a combination of works that are on view in the exhibition, along with process shots and also some reference material that I was using kind of along the way to help form the imagery that I was working with. But I wanted to start with this image because in talking about scale, you know, I've always worked with the figure throughout my career as an artist. I've always been fascinated by the way that bodies move in space, the way they relate to each other, the way they relate to their environment. I think a lot about figures trying to find a way out of the environment that they're in, some sort of exit strategy. And I think that kind of hints at maybe the existential qualities in the work that Rachel is starting to get at, and that dark undertone. But I wanted to show you this image first because you can kind of see a chair and a table here to the right to give you a sense of scale. And I had been working primarily at this size for the bulk of my time as a painter, and that was because I felt like it was really important for the figure to be close to life size, and for there to be enough environment around the figure so that a viewer could feel like they could almost step into the painting to really have a one-to-one physical relationship with those figures, even though they're quite mannered in their rendering or style. But so I'd been working at this scale for a long time, and then, you know, maybe 5 years or so ago, I started doing a lot of commuting and wanting to keep making in transit. And so I found myself drawing all the time on the train and realizing that, you know, in the most obvious way, the figure could exist at different scales and really operate in different ways. And I got sort of excited about going back and forth between two different scales. And I know a lot of artists draw in preparation for paintings, and I always felt a little bit like, if I've already made an image, why would I make it again? Like I really love the discovery factor in making. And yet I found that so many elements shifted when I shifted scale or material, which is, again, maybe obvious, but I just hadn't really given myself permission to experiment that way. So I was really excited to start working on a variety of scales. So again, just to show you the shift, there's one large painting in the gallery, which is fairly small. And then all of the, so this is about 5 by 5.5 feet, this painting. And then all of the other paintings are from around 5 by 7 to like 8 by 10 inches. So something that you could kind of hold in your hands. And so there's a very different kind of looking that happens when you're engaging with these two different scales of work. And, you know, we can talk about that, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the way the whole show looked together. This is one of the first times that I've had the opportunity to make work in preparation for a show. Usually I'm making a lot of work and then someone comes over and selects things, but Rachel was so generous in saying, you know, just really giving me freedom to think about what I wanted to exhibit. And so I had been making a lot of work on paper in the last year and a half during COVID, you know, speaking to the sort of impermanence of our time in the last, you know, most recent past, and also this kind of stress of the idea of accumulating more large objects in a time that was so uncertain. I really kind of zoned in on working on paper and also using this medium that I could do in transit. And Rachel, you know, showed some of those works on paper and in her last show a couple months ago. But then in gearing up to make this show, I realized I didn't really know how to negotiate the framing of these very tactile and delicate works. And I wanted to try to figure out how to make an object that didn't necessarily require a frame. So I switched to working on panel and on canvas at a similar scale. And I'll show you some close-ups so you can start to see what we're talking about. So you can see sort of the side of this work. This is about 8 by 10 inches and it's on a wooden panel, so you can see the wood on the side. This is like a 5 by 7 inch painting, and I'll show you all a bunch of detailed views as well. But so again, just give you a sense of the sort of intimacy of something that size, and also the material is acrylic on an absorbent ground. So the acrylic is really kind of getting layered almost in this like kind of layers of translucency that get built up and built up. This one's on canvas over here. Again, just to step back, I'll show you a few of the things that were happening in my studio just right before the exhibition. And then again, just feel free to jump in because I could just talk forever. Rachel and I are both educators, so we, we like to talk. This is an image of the painting that's now at Shelter hanging in my studio. And this image on the left, I wanted to show you because it was a screen print, a 3-layer screen print that I had made in collaboration with a press in Indianapolis. And this happened before the large painting. So, you know, just to give you a sense of how the same image or a similar image might operate in different media, this is maybe like 2 feet by 3 feet on kind of like a harder stock paper, you know, and then the image before, same running figures, similar background. But, you know, in this case, I kind of created this structure thinking of like nature, like some sort of long, tall cypress tree. You know, you could read it in a lot of different ways, but that's what I was thinking about. And then, in the next image, I was thinking of this as sort of like columns or some more of an architectural framework. I started thinking about echoing the running motion, you know, with these sort of cropped or truncated feet. So again, just thinking about the, you know, ways that this same image could operate on different materials, on different scales, you know, coming back
Jaclyn,
to oh, yeah.
when I see this image here, Seurat's famous painting comes to mind, the one that they liken to an Egyptian work of art. I don't know if you know what I'm thinking of, but both the yellow and sort of the background, the colonnades, and in the other one that you showed, it brings the Kiriko to mind. Are these artists that you find influential or?
Oh, totally. I mean, you'll see, I put some images of artists that I've been thinking about recently in the slideshow, but there are so many. I mean, I'm constantly pulling from a very wide range of visual information. And yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think the Kiriko makes a lot of sense to me in this case. And I'm not exactly sure which image you're talking about with Seurat, but I love thinking about Seurat in relation to color and the way he builds texture. So yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time with Rachel at MoMA teaching from some of those objects. It's really nice. I'm sure they are lodged in my brain in a deep way. So just to like go back even further, I went to school at, I got a BA in art at UCLA. And at the time I was doing a lot of photography and painting and using a lot of my own photographs as references for thinking about the figure in space. I thought a lot about like Ralph Eugene Meatyard and, you know, maybe like Tina Barney and other people who are kind of thinking about domestic space, you know, people engaging in their environments. And this is my father. I think he might be at the talk somewhere in one of these squares, balancing in our living room at my home in Los Angeles. This is an image of my friend in grad school who's an actor who I asked to come in to pose for me as I was thinking through, I was thinking a lot about Chagall in grad school. I thought about this idea of like making a floating figure feel believable, like how you create a space in a painting that feels like completely suspended from our reality, and yet you buy into it, you know? And so I had kind of sketched out the structure of the figures on this larger painting. And then I was often thinking through ideas that couldn't actually exist. And I was trying to get him to mimic this gesture. I've since kind of moved away from using photographs or, you know, friends as reference points, but this is sort of the way that I was operating at the time. And, you know, other artists that I was thinking about at this time, somebody like, you know, like the Bauhaus staircase, right? This idea of like kind of figures moving down or up towards you, away from you, and this idea of a kind of like dance that they're engaging in relation to the architecture of a space. Again, because my father's an actor, I've spent a lot of time thinking about theater and drama and like this sort of mannered movement. And that's something like I really enjoy playing with in painting. Susan, I see your mic is on. Let me know if you have a question. I'm not sure if that's, I'll keep going, but feel free to jump in. Also, another person that I thought a lot about is Neil Jenny. He has this particular book of paintings that's called The Bad Years. And I've been thinking a lot in recent paintings about this kind of paring down of information and what that looks like to kind of strip the scene of all of the details and yet like include enough textural information or information in light and shadow or in poses or gesture, to give a really strong sense of the psychology of a scene. So these are, some people that were inspiring me, another person, Sue Ellen Roca, and I think this just gets at like this kind of Chicago imagist, genre of working where this like more cartoonish language enters 2D form. And yet there's like a real, I think, seriousness to the imagery. And so I really like that, those two things bumping up against each other. I love the idea of inserting humor into work and still kind of like containing some kind of gravity in whatever image is transpiring. And okay, so, aside from art references, I spend a lot of time walking and looking and gathering information. So I wanted to show you just quickly a range of images that I've collected in my neighborhood because especially during quarantine, but in general, I spend a lot of time walking. Maybe some of you as artists feel this way. I think that like making art can be quite meditative, and I see, walking and gathering visual information as sort of operating in a similar space. So I often am going out in my neighborhood, taking long walks, looking for like texture and light inspiration. And I'll, again, just flip through a bunch of these images, but this kind of night scene became more and more prominent in the photographs I was taking. And these aren't really photographs that I would necessarily specifically refer back to, except that I'm taking a record of it and then like leaving it. And it was only like today when I started kind of going through my log of images that I thought, oh, these really have influenced a lot of the ways that I'm making images in painting, not necessarily specific parts, but as a whole, that, they're sort of sitting in the back of my mind's eye. So, just a range of images. And I think especially the light in these spaces has contributed quite a bit to this recent body of work. This kind of day for night feeling where you see like a flash, but also, there's kind of a high element of contrast and high key colors. And something I've been thinking a lot about as well is kind of nature and how it starts to operate as a body. And I'll show you a few other reference points that I think kind of relate to this. But and again, like maybe just the amount of time I'm spending by myself, but like the way that a plant can start to take on this kind of anthropomorphic quality, and behave like a person in space, as your imagination starts to go the more time you spend by yourself, I suppose. Here are some daytime images, again, just thinking about the way plants move in this neighborhood, textures of the city, spending a lot of time in New York commuting, and then just loving the beach coming from the West Coast, spending a lot of time looking at the ocean, the moon, the sun, and just like really paying attention to the way that those elements create texture and light, and, build out the feeling in a space. So these are just some of the things that I'm daily like kind of taking stock of and collecting in my brain. And again, texture is a really important element. And coming back to the work that I was doing previous to the show with Rachel at Shelter, I think a lot of these kind of elements were starting to enter these images even 2 years prior. This is a larger scale painting that I'm facing right now in my studio, and these kind of neon colors versus like the painting is made on a blue fabric, so that blue in the center is actually like the blue of the material that I'm painting on. And when you paint directly on fabric, some of you probably know this, like there's no primer on the fabric, so the paint is getting absorbed very quickly. So a lot of layers have to be built up in order for the color to start to materialize and show up. And so anyways, like the paintings start to kind of reveal themselves over time. And this is sort of an image of a figure kind of catching a glimpse of himself or someone else, like looking down, maybe like to pick something up, and then, revealing some other figure through his legs, like having sort of a surprise encounter with another figure. So a lot of the work that I make is quite responsive in that, like maybe I'd start with the figure and then the environment gets built up around them. So I didn't necessarily know that all of these kind of organic shapes would form around these two, but as I developed the scene, I started to kind of build on what already existed within the figures. And, I'll kind of show you a lot of the ways that process has unfolded in the work that's on view at Shelter. Again, please just feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. This is that painting you saw on the wall. This is a painting that's currently in process. I was doing a lot of experimenting before I knew that I was going to be making this show, which is, I think, one of the strange benefits of COVID is that, like, there was not a feeling that anyone would be seeing anything. So you could really, as an artist, I think, kind of hunker down and maybe even expand your practice in a way that you might not if you had a deadline. So I found myself really playing with material and scale. In this case, like collecting sand from the beach and starting to kind of layer and create texture and pattern on this surface, which is like an athletic mesh, that orange. So this one's still in progress, but you can kind of see what I'm coming back to now. I was doing a lot of watercolor paintings, again, because I really wanted to be able to make things in transit. And I love the kind of just ease of being able to pick something up and take it with you wherever you go. So a lot of the paintings and drawings were based on daily observations of domestic spaces, but also started slowly to move into these more kind of surreal or uncanny spaces where I was kind of starting with maybe someone I saw on the street, but then responsibly allowing for the lines or shapes around her to create maybe a more fantastical space. This one, again, relates to some of like those night scenes, looking at trees and plants in my environment, feeling in my neighborhood, feeling like they're sort of dancing or swaying in the wind. And then I realized after making this that probably also lodged in my brain was this Disney image that some of you may know of, these like dancing trees and flowers that many of us grew up on. So, you know, again, these images like kind of come back to us over time, and I don't always realize when I'm making it where it came from, but just kind of trying to piece together or puzzle together the gaps. This is another drawing. Rachel was talking about some of the colored pencil drawings I made when we first started talking about a show, and this is one based on a couple that I saw interacting on a street in my neighborhood. So, okay, and then, you know, some of the lines in this drawing I wanted to point out because the colored pencil lines were something that I started to get really kind of obsessive about. I loved the kinds of marks you could make with a really fine tip and all of those colors sitting next to each other. I think maybe, Barry, that relates to Syrah in some way, just the way they start to activate. And thank you, Fran. You know, I wanted to come back to this in the paintings and figure out a way to render this in the paintings. I also just threw in an image of these Chagall set and costume designs because I think, you know, they're related to a lot of the things I think about in terms of like creating a staginess or a mannerism or a whole world for, you know, these figures to interact with. Okay, and like just a few more references before I move finally to the work in the show. These are some figurative sculptures and paintings that I've seen recently that, you know, I think relate to some of the ideas I think about in terms of like the uncanny, like something that feels real, but also exaggerated, close to life size, you know, but also like materially constructed in a way that, you know, takes you outside of a real space. This is a sculpture that existed. This is all from upstate this fall. It was sort of like blow up and then release. And, you know, I just love the absurdity of that kind of a figure, like trying to stand and then, you know, collapsing on itself. This one's up right now in Queens. So even though I'm making 2D, you know, painting, I think a lot about sculpture and, you know, theater and dance. These are some paintings I saw again in upstate New York. And I was thinking about like the three-dimensionality of a painting, painting the sides of an image. Okay, and finally we made it to one of the smaller paintings in the show at Shelter. And a lot of these images come from daily observations, but also dream space. And I had this recurring dream of like being close to the ocean and this wave sort of like coming, you know, almost like a tsunami, really like kind of enveloping a space, but at a distance, like through a window. So it was something that like was consuming my brain space and that I wanted to kind of return to in some way. And it started just with this window, and I had a drawing where a figure existed in the room. And then at some point, well, it started actually in a completely different palette. So it was like really coming back to acrylic paint and thinking about, you know, what a more domestic space would feel like, and then set this painting aside for a long time. And when I came back to it, I realized I wanted the room to be activated in a much more intense way in terms of color. So the scene changed. So all that to say, like a lot of the paintings, they start with one image, but the way that the paint gets built up and the palette is set changes pretty drastically from beginning to end. Did anyone ever see that Matisse show where they show all the different layers of his paintings? I think about that a lot. It's like, I don't know how important it is, to reveal those things. I think there's a lot of like stock put into that, like the effort that goes into something. And sometimes I think like the quickness of something can be just as valuable as something that's worked on. But I thought about that a lot in the making of this show, just like the different iterations of the painting that exist in layers underneath and how much that was sort of necessary to getting to the end point. This was one of the first paintings I made in this body of work. And I started it on the beach in Provincetown. I was doing an art residency and I saw this person coming out of the water and kind of like maybe reaching for their bathing suit or their bag. And just that gesture was, what got me started. And, just to show you the setup, I was just really wanting to be outside while I was painting and find a way to manifest both of my favorite things simultaneously. So I took these little prepared panels out to the beach. I started the painting there, and then I continued indoors at a table. And so the painting started in a pretty loose way and without a full plan, and then things changed, like this kind of animal entered the scene. And then, I started thinking about William Blake and like Tiger, and, just sort of like even a Rousseau, in the sort of corner. And then by the end of the painting, just only like kind of this hint of that tiger's face remained, but I felt like it was just kind of important to try it out to see what that looked like, and then, to let it go in a different direction slightly. I'll just keep talking, but feel free to jump in. I have a lot of images. This is another painting that happened around the same time. So I'm working from a bank of like daily observations, inspiration from other art, dream space, and also sometimes stories, like something I'm reading, fiction. Sometimes a friend will relay a memory, and I like to talk on the phone while I paint. And a friend of mine was describing some memory he had of lying in the back of a car, listening to music, I think, and it just kind of got me thinking about what that might look like. And the car sort of got simplified in some ways as the painting continued, and then I ended up adding the ocean and the moon, and this kind of mark of like what was in the last painting, the grass or the tree, or what I could read also as water. That's something that kind of became one of the main connectors between each painting and this body of work. Oh, okay, Elaine's asking for, we'll throw info in the chat for my show for sure. I hope you all can see it. So, something
Jacqueline, let me read a few of the comments. Babs Reingold says, the small pieces presented in the gallery are wonderful. Fran Beeler says, congratulations on the show. Very interesting to see some of your inspirations. I do want to ask a deeper question, because when I looked through your work earlier, I did see the wave imagery repeated. And once you said it's a recurring dream that you have, one thing I've learned from trying to understand dreams, it's not the imagery so much, but the feeling. So let me ask you, in your dream, what was the feeling you get when you have that recurring dream with the wave?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I think that like most of my dreams relate to like sort of a fear of a lack of control, which may be common for a lot of people, but it happens in a few different ways. It plays out in like, driving in a car and having no brakes, or, a wave coming over. And what I've noticed is even when the dream recurs, I can kind of get a sense of my state of mind based on my reaction in the dream, like what you're asking. So for example, like more recently, I had a dream where the brakes weren't working, but I felt calm about it, versus like in most other cases where there's like a little bit of a moment of fear and distress and unknowing. And I think like in the wave dreams, I had a similar feeling, like a sense of calmness, even though there's like kind of a slow motion quality in my dreams, maybe in other people's as well, that suspends in a way that creates like, a little bit less anxiety than might exist in reality, because you're kind of not sure where it might lead. So I think that kind of can contribute to the feel, whether or not the feeling is like deep anxiety or this like kind of waiting for, for the results. Corey's asking about lucid dreaming. I haven't been able to control mine yet, but I do often recognize that I'm in a dream, but like I haven't been able to to manifest the end result just yet. I hope that answered your question, Barry. Yeah, I think it changes depending on my state of mind during the day. That kind of filters in a pretty obvious, sometimes embarrassingly obvious way. But so, I mean, yes, you know, they come up a lot, these feelings. And I think like something that I've always been really interested in painting is like, you know, I'm interested in film and theater and in dream space. Like they all have this element of movement and time, which painting doesn't have. So like, how do you create a sense of time in a painting, or this kind of like pregnant, you know, elastic space of suspension, you know, or kind of waiting, or, you know, something about to happen. And so it's kind of exciting to think about how either like movement in paint or material can allow you to like enter in a time-based way, even though you're looking at like a pretty static medium. And this is a close-up of the figure, just, you know, really kind of wrestling with how I want the actual mannered, you know, face or body to exist. And I very rarely know in the beginning, and it's kind of just this reworking and using a lot of the negative space around the figure to kind of carve out that shape in the way that feels right in relation to the space. And there's the whole image again.
I have
another one. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Rachel.
Or a question.
Yeah.
So one thing that everybody here is missing is the amazing titles.
Oh, right.
And I was just thinking of, you know, in terms of kind of sort of naming an emotional state, you know, related to dreams, or, you know, kind of that temporal navigating of space. So the piece before is the one we were just looking at. What's that title?
Oh, I gotta pull it up. I'm gonna pull up all the titles so we can.
It's called "We Will Touch Our Feet."
Oh yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. But just curious, like, where do the titles come from in relation to sort of this, well, your, you know, inspiration and goals for each piece?
Yeah, the titles typically happen at the very end, and usually once the image has settled. So I have kind of a running list of phrases that I keep from passages that I'm reading, or you know, things I'm thinking about. And then usually when a body of work is complete, I'll try to find titles to match the image. And when I say match, I'm usually trying to avoid something that will behave as a descriptor, and instead something that will kind of like sit next to it. Because, you know, a lot of times when you're making figurative imagery, a descriptive title can kind of shut down the reading of the work, and you know, also make it behave in a more illustrative way. So I'm usually trying to think about something that can kind of behave like a, you know, a poem in relation to it, or kind of act as an addition of texture or feeling. Oh, thanks, Eileen's loving my title. I'll try to read more of them. Rachel, do you have them near you? I'll ask you maybe to fill in. I can pull up the list.
I do. I have them.
Okay.
All here.
Amazing. Okay, so maybe, yeah, you can kind of read us the titles as we go. This one is also based on a story a friend was telling me about lying on the floor in the bathroom. And, you know, the way these images get read are so beholden to, you know, as viewers and as like a society, our state of consciousness at that time. Like I think that the bulk of the people who came to the opening a couple weeks ago were asking, oh, are these quarantine paintings? Did you make these over the last 2 years? And I made these paintings over the last 2 months. I really was excited to have, you know, time to really dedicate to making new work. And so, of course, the quarantine has not escaped me yet. Like I haven't quite tucked that out of my psyche. But I wasn't making these in quarantine, and yet we're reading the images through that lens now. So I think, you know, a friend was saying, oh, this really feels like that experience of just like waiting, you know, and trying to understand what's happening with your body, having this sort of like intimate experience with your domestic space that you can't leave. I was thinking a little bit more about like kind of private spaces within a home, and like having a moment that is private, but like actually not having the ability to like shut the door necessarily. Rachel's just put in the chat, the title is A Huge Crowd of Spectators, and this one's 10 by 8 inches.
Jaclyn,
oh yeah.
Jaclyn, is your gallery in your home?
Yeah, so my gallery, Good Naked, started actually around the same time as Rachel's gallery in October 2019. So it was for 6 months in my house in the second bedroom and in the hallways. I would invite artists to come make murals. And then in quarantine, we switched to a combination of virtual exhibitions and outdoor shows, which are like primarily the ones that we've talked to ATOA about. We had some like day only outdoor exhibitions, and then the artists came and had a really nice conversation with Barry about their work. And a lot of times the outdoor exhibitions, I would bring the work back to my space. And I've been doing some collaborations recently with other galleries who have more permanent spaces. Like we'll have a Good Naked show at Shelter with Rachel in the spring, which I'm really looking forward to. But yeah, so I mean, for the most part, my home is all art in every direction. My studio is in my living room. The gallery is in the second bedroom. Most people, when they come in, ask where I sleep because my bed is in the corner in the very back of the house. But I feel really grateful to be surrounded by work all the time, and certainly the kind of domestic space. I'm like living in a more suburban part of Brooklyn. I'm in Ditmas Park. I'm sure influences the way I'm thinking about the images, and actually I can show you some more concrete ways how it does. This is just like me. Oh, go ahead.
What I'm thinking, Jaclyn, is when you do that, when you have a gallery in your home, as Blanca Amazuka does, AAA in the South Bronx, and many galleries do, you do expose yourself, your personal side. People go into the bathroom, they see a toothbrush, they see. So I don't know if that's crept in. I do want to read, Eileen Hoffman says she loves your titles. Fran Beeler says she can totally relate to the desire to get movement and time into your two-dimensional art. That is a running theme in her own work. So
that's nice. Yeah, I'm always really curious how artists do that in different ways. I think scale can do that so much as well. I mean, I was thinking a lot about movement in relation to brushstrokes, but the scale forces the viewer to behave physically in relation to the work, whether they're kind of leaning in or stepping back. So that's always kind of an interesting dance to observe. This is kind of me sitting at my kitchen table. I'm constantly kind of moving between my studio and other parts of the house just to mix up the environment, just to show you kind of how they get started, usually with one color in a more monochromatic way. And then, the palette gets set in relation to that first kind of draft of the image. And, I start kind of laying in color from there. And a lot of parts of the image aren't necessarily set from the beginning. Like I didn't really know what would happen in this, like if it would be a mirror or a window. It ended up being a window with a cat. So just, to give you a sense of how things build, these shadows became sort of a more graphic line, things that I could play with. I was much more aware in this body of work of trying to make connections amongst the group. Usually it's like one image at a time, and was kind of building this group of paintings up all together. So I was really trying to think about connections. Again, I think the most kind of like fluid connection is this line that can be hair or waves or grass. In this case, I was thinking of sort of like a shag rug beneath this bed. But I was kind of trying to think about how the palette and the brushstrokes could create links visually amongst the group. And Rachel, thank you for adding the title. She just added, "This is lovely below us."
Can I jump in for a second?
Oh
here?
yeah, please go ahead, Babs.
Well, I just wanted to ask, now that you've been working on this small scale, and I don't know how many years you were working on the large scale, but are you re-examining some of the marks that you're making that you would, if you went back to a large scale, how those marks would translate? Because I work, well, mostly I do a lot of drawings of my sculptures or installations, and it's interesting thinking about what happened to them also on small scale and just the relationship of space. But in paintings, it's particularly interesting, I think, when you're going from very large, and I don't know what your large was. What are they, about 5 feet, 6 feet?
Yeah.
And how many years were you working in that space? And then this is obviously relatively new, this small space, and whether the marks are going to be something that will come about now into big ones. Do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely feel energized to make larger work, having spent, kind of dedicated dedicated 2 months to making painting, it gave me sort of like, you know, a new desire to investigate other, you know, other things outside of that, you know, that smaller scale work. And as I'm coming back to the larger work, I mean, certainly something that I've noticed immediately is that when you're working on a large scale, the material does so much work for you. The texture of the material and the scale of it are, you know, are doing so much before you even really begin to make marks on the canvas or fabric, whatever your surface is. And I think what I noticed about the smaller works is that like just every little corner mattered so much more because you're really asking folks to investigate the surface, which happens, I think, for the larger work, but just not in the same way. I think, you know, it depends what kind of work you're making, of course, but it's certainly something I'm thinking about. I mean, on a practical level, my hands were sort of cramping by the end of this body of work. So I think I have to be strategic about, you know, how I space out the kinds of mark making I'm doing just to preserve my body. But I do love the idea of these kinds of smaller marks on a larger scale. I think working on panel allows for a certain kind of pressure that, you know, is different on a stretched canvas. So that's something to think about if I were to continue like trying to really recreate those types of lines that I had in drawing. So like a lot of practical questions, but I think visually, yeah, it would be really fun to experiment for sure.
Well,
yeah.
It's like it opens up another door. It's like something you hadn't thought about the moment you switch scale, which a lot of people don't think about that back and forth. Because I've made, I have my MFA in painting, but and I used to do very large, and then suddenly I would do this whole series of small ones too, and you're using these tiny little brushes, and it's a whole other world. But it does make you think about space structurally in a different way. And then the only thing I'm going to add is there's this, there's a couple of artists that this was making me think of, and it's a stretch. It's an artist you may not know of. I've spent time for years now between St. Pete, Florida, and New York, and there's an artist by the name of Mernette Larson. Who,
I love her. I know.
Yeah, she taught for 30 years at USF, and she has those crazy bodies, you know. And she also, something about the way some of your pieces with the space, the way you were structuring the space reminded me a little bit of the way she was structuring her space. So
that's really nice. I appreciate you saying that. No, I hadn't thought about her work in a long time, but I think you're totally spot on, and I'm gonna have to return to those images now that you mentioned it. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, I love those paintings. I mean, I think the kind of light she creates and the kind of imagery she's working with, I feel very connected to, for sure. And actually maybe even this painting in particular, I really struggled with this one. I'll show you like kind of how it transpired over time, but it started again from a dream, the idea of someone kind of swimming or wading in water. The title Rachel just added is The Plain and the Forest. It's acrylic on canvas, and what I realized as I started working on this, because I hadn't worked on gessoed canvas in a while, is that acrylic can really behave in a very plastic way on top of a primed surface. I had just forgotten. And so in adding acrylic paint to the surface, I was just like really struggling with achieving the kind of texture that I was really enamored with on the paneled surface. So it started with this kind of just really black, a little bit more of a brute sketch, and slowly got built up with white paint. This is maybe TMI, but like my toenails and the iridescence of my toenails is kind of inspiring where I maybe wanted to go with it. My pattern leggings, I'm thinking about like the way colors and contrast are interacting. So a lot of times just peripheral information can filter its way in. This is again, just to show you like the way the group was built up at once. So kind of like working with a group of very rough images from dream space and from observational space. And then, kind of like taking turns moving from one image to the other. Regina is asking, I can see some of your paintings as print blocks. Have you experimented with printing? This is a great question as well. I kind of struggle with this question because I am often asked it, and I love the idea of printmaking, and yet I'm very much beholden to the pleasure of the immediacy of painting. And my patience in printmaking is a little bit less than I think would be beneficial to making a really interesting print. So I'm often luckily being invited to work at printmaking studios where they like kind of help me speed up the process. But I think I'm working on a copper etching right now for the first time, and it's like making an invisible drawing. Like there's just really no way to see what the surface will achieve until you start, rolling it through. And, there's something really exciting about the surprise factor there, but I also am feeling a little bit blind in the making. So yeah, block printing. I've only really tried screen printing and lithography so far. So this copper etching will be my first time, and I'll have to slowly make my way through other moves. But I appreciate you asking that question, because it's something I think about because of the way I layer paint and color.
There's another
definitely
interesting
related.
method, which I did for years, was monotypes.
Oh yeah, so fun.
Yes, which could
Yeah,
be
and
lots of fun.
much more aligned with painting.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
I'd like to
go
chime
ahead,
in. I
Yeah.
think most people don't understand scale. As an artist, I started to do smaller work thinking it would inform my larger work. And I enjoyed the smaller work very much, but it does not translate to the larger work, because the smaller work, whether it's the tools or the motion, is very specific. And when you think, you could then take that to a larger scale, I found it just doesn't happen at all. I think each scale has its own sort of tools in play, and it's nice to try and learn from one, bring it to the other. But I think they're very different games, whereas logically, you would think you could jump into the small and then go large and get all this extra detail. I find for myself, it does not happen like that.
They really are completely different animals. I totally agree. And also, I think that what I've found in teaching is that I notice most people have kind of a natural proclivity toward one or the other, where like for me, large scale always felt the most natural, and most of my classmates did not know how to work large. And for me, working small felt very, just against my natural inclination. So I think there is, this kind of thing that happens where, and then there's also this factor of not a lot of students are encouraged to work large because of the fear of wasting material or space, or just the practicality of taking up a lot of room in a studio. And so we don't often get practice. I was really lucky as a student. I went to Cal Arts as a high school student, and they, in a figure drawing class, gave us all giant sheets of butcher paper, and we pinned them to the wall. And so we were working at life-size scales with charcoal as teenagers, which I feel really kind of opened up my freedom and, to experiment and explore in that way. And I'm often trying to give students as many opportunities as possible in that department, because I just feel it's such a pleasure to get to try all the different ways, and it's not always encouraged. Anyways, so yeah, I totally agree. And I think someone else in the chat does too. This is another 5x7-inch painting. It was, I think, inspired by the brick wall out my window. This is not out my window. This is a much more beautiful brick wall than is outside this is my window. And I think one time a window, someone who was coming to help fix my window sort of made fun of my view, and I realized I was really living in New York. But so here's, the view out my kitchen window. And I think, I had this idea of working with that image. I've always found that kind of alluring, to think about this kind of doll's house that we're all able to kind of peer into and try to figure out what's happening inside someone else's world or space. And again, it started just with the structure, and then I started thinking about filling in what might be happening inside, and became this kind of place to experiment with truncated forms of the body, or again, these sort of marks that were recurring in other paintings as waves or grass could then be hair. And that was really fun to get to kind of do an eye on a larger scale than I'd been working with in the other paintings. So just the window space became a place to play with imagery. And this is another one that transformed a lot over time. I think I started this painting maybe 10 years ago, and it was a painting of a hand on a knee, mostly black and brown, and I just wasn't really satisfied with it. And when I started making the body of work for Shelter, I kind of pulled out all these unfinished paintings just to see if there was anything that I wanted to return to, and it was one that I felt resonated still, and I wanted to try to resolve. So I'll just show you kind of some of the different iterations. Well, here's just a picture of my hand. I'm often using my own body and face to pose. And just the texture, I feel of that towel to me relates to some of the textures of that shag rug in the other painting we just looked at. But here is, again, my hand on my knee, and this is a different iteration of the hand when it was gold. And next, I think I was thinking of that brick wall and trying to like kind of create some connections between this hand and the wall, and just thinking of it, it could be more of like a surreal space, more like a Magritte, where you're like sort of seeing something inside of something else. And then that didn't really feel right to me either. And it, I kind of eventually came back and landed on this sort of covering of all of the choices. But again, it just felt like this way of really, like, I don't think I could have gotten to this without all of the others. And it felt like it was kind of building the richness of the layers of paint and color that sat underneath. And yeah, the painting just felt like it needed to be worked. So it was kind of fun to see that process unfold, especially in the end. The middle was a little bit frustrating sometimes, just like not being able to really find it. This is another painting that kind of came after some of the others, and where I was able to pull in imagery from some of the earlier work. It started again with a dream, and the dream involved like moving through a house in the dark at night and kind of like seeing light in certain spaces. And oh, J. Arp. Joan, yes, yeah. Love ARP. I think Barry was just adding that. Yeah, ARP, big fan. This is one where like it started in a really loose way. And in some ways, like just making this version of it felt like enough. This one's called Let Me Out. It's 5 by 7 inches. And yet it didn't really feel resolved. And I kept thinking about artists like Milton Avery, and others like Neil Jenny, who we talked about before, who could create a very finished painting with a sort of looseness and quite unfinished quality. And so I was trying to wrestle with like what it would look like to make this feel more resolved and finished. And I ended up sort of bringing in this image of the lamp and kind of like adding harder edge lines and kind of like covering some things. And again, just really trying to refine the image in a way that kept, retained the softness of the dream space quality, but still, could feel more concrete and weighted in its like place. And here are just some Milton Avery images that I looked to for inspiration as I was trying to resolve those questions. Okay, so I'll just keep pushing through. There are just maybe a few more paintings from the show that we haven't talked about, but again, I love your questions, so feel free to ask if you have or any comments. This is another one kind of related to that. Go ahead, Barry.
I just want to remind everybody, or people came in late, this is ATOA Artist Talk on Art. We're a 501c3. We meet every Monday. I want to recognize Fran Beeler, a board member who is here. If anybody would like to present or has a theme or an idea for a talk, take a look on our website. You'll see information where you can reach out and get our form for our 2022 program and present or be part of a presentation or come up with a theme and present it and be part of our planning committee. So thank you all. Just wanted to let you all know we're here every Monday. Great job so far, Jaclyn.
Thank you, Barry. And I'll put my website in the chat, and also Rachel, if you want to add the shelter website, and I'll put that up on the last slide too. But in case anyone's looking for information and would like to see the show, we'd love for you to see it in person. This is another image that came from this kind of wave scene that I was talking about, but it's kind of fun in the translation. Like it started, I'll just kind of push through. Started with this kind of brushy mark. To get out the idea, I was thinking of like someone driving in a car and the waves sort of enveloping the road. And then, eventually, see if I can play this. Eventually, I started adding this kind of interference or iridescent paint. So it's kind of changing the way the palette was operating. That kind of, whoops, see if I can push forward. Did I get stuck? Oh yeah, that wave, from the previous image was coming back, but I think the lines from the grass or, the trees were kind of entering the stylistic choices in this one. And then, the car became a little bit more simplified or pared down. Like kind of as I work, it's again, this very responsive way of working where the image starts to reveal itself and, kind of tell me what to do. And, parts of the image become more important and, some things get covered. Thank you, Eileen. If anyone needs to leave early, I appreciate you joining, and hopefully I'll see you at the next one. I think we're almost toward the end, but I'll just show you a few more, related to these sort of night scenes. Again, just thinking about the way these marks can operate and create texture and movement. Thank you, Regina. Just looking at the comments as we go. This one, I'll show you another video just so you can see the tree that inspired it. See if this works. Is this playing for everyone? Can you all see that? I passed by this tree on the way home from a friend's house in my neighborhood, and I was just like completely transfixed by this movement. And, you know, again, just thinking about how it might translate into a painting space. And of course, like, you know, a painting cannot do the same thing that a video, you know, a film or a video or, you know, wind and space can do. But, you know, it started, you know, I was envisioning this kind of in a daytime space, and then realizing that like the, you know, the night scene was really something that I wanted, you know, to keep coming back to. And so those layers got covered. And again, still like you see the blue coming through, and, you know, some of the cross hatching and the line work creates a sense of, I think, dimension and movement, but it was really fun to play with. Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, it's kind of fun to reveal different like layers of the process. This is again just to show my studio and how it was operating as I was building up the body of work, really just like finishing something and then putting it next to others, and really trying to think of the group as one giant painting, and, you know, think about how they could bounce off of one another and talk to each other and create, you know, connections. And, you know, just continuing throughout the process to lay them out in different ways and see how the colors and the marks could, you know, sit in relation to each other. And at some point kind of bringing in some of the older drawings and paintings just to see if there were enough connections to potentially even introduce them to, you know, the space of the exhibition. We didn't end up hanging them, but some of these are in the back room. So if you go and you see Rachel and you want to see those in person, you can ask for a private viewing. Let's see, someone is adding enjoy references. Personal reference, I appreciate that. This is the last, I think, painting I have in the slideshow, and it was based on, again, a dream space, this idea of this kind of like floating car moving above this kind of road filled with traffic. I'm from Los Angeles, so that is deeply embedded in my headspace. But it felt quite calming, that scene. And I didn't know when I started the painting that I would be introducing these figures into the car, but you know, it ended up feeling like the right space for a kind of human motion, and, you know, in the sphere of this like much more geometric or like, again, pared down scene. And this is like a slide from Blade Runner, because that's a movie that I think is, again, lodged in the back of my brain. And, you know, not necessarily something I pulled up as an image while I was making it, but something that when I look at that image, I think back to. I love science fiction in general, and Philip K. Dick is a favorite. And let's see, this is, I was sitting in the back of a cab, and there was this like kind of light passing through the plastic divider. I guess, again, another like benefit of COVID potentially. And I was really, again, just transfixed by this imagery of color and line and space, and, you know, thinking about how those, you know, colors might operate in a painted sphere, you know, even if pared down or made more still. The image is called Faster, but I think of it as like a very slow kind of floating moment. Someone is saying futuristic, magical. Yeah, I think a lot about magic and painting and art in general. Audrey is adding, although it's clear a lot of thought goes into this work, it maintains an unself-conscious quality. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I try to work more intuitively. Wonder what people in the car are talking about. Me too. Okay, so I'll land on this in case anybody wants to write down information about the show, and then we, you know, if we have more time and people would like to stay, I'm happy to answer questions. But this is, again, my name is Jaclyn Cedar, and the show is called Nightmoves at Shelter Gallery, and it's up through December 22nd. They're open Tuesday through Saturday, 12 to 6. And we hope you'll come see the work in person, since all of you are artists, you know how essential it is to have a physical, tactile experience with objects in space. So I'm really happy to have these out in the world. I'm reading, Elaine is writing, it could also be an elevator going up, and these are windows. Oh, I love that. Totally. So Barry or Rachel, if you have questions, or if anyone else in the group would like to share a thought or observation, I would be happy to hear from you all, and we can.
Well, first thing we do, ATOA, round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Snaps and claps.
I really appreciate it.
That was the fastest 100+ slide presentation anyone has ever seen.
Keep it
What was it,
moving.
It was 106. That was
Oh, I don't
great.
know. You kept track better than I did.
Very nice. Let's just open it up for questions and thoughts. You know how we do it here. It does not have to be a question. Feel free to make comments and statements, anything you like.
I will ask this question. As somebody who sometimes has a lot of output, doing 3 or 5 new pieces a day, you obviously have a great output. You're very prolific in your work, and I mean, I just when I'm doing it, I think I'm being a creep. I'm just wondering, how could I be doing? They can't all be good and blah blah blah. And I try every once in a while, I'll go back and try to eliminate some, because how can I never put through these, etc., etc. How do you deal with that?
I think I missed a tiny bit of the last part of your question. Maybe could you repeat, or if somebody else heard, it just cut out a little bit. You're saying, how do you deal with
How do you
having
do
too
the
much work?
volume? I think
Oh,
he's
with volume.
asked, how do you do such volume?
Okay. Well, I think again, like this has to do with,
Anthony, how do you deal with the volume?
how do I deal with the volume of work that I produce? It is like the eternal question, right? Because like there are hundreds of Picassos in basements of museums. Like there's just more work, I think, than can be consumed in the world. So I try not to worry about it. I don't make sculpture. I would love to make sculpture. And I think one of the things that keeps me from that is that I know I like to work large, and I don't think I have, storage space to really. But I think also, like, someone spoke about in the beginning of our conversation, like there are different ways to deal with this, right? Like one is, someone said, I'm destroying my work. Whenever somebody says that, I it kind of like hurts my heart, because one of my favorite de Kooning books has a little tiny picture of a painting that I love of his in black and white, and the caption says like destroyed by artists. And it's like, like we can't always judge our work in the best way as artists. Like we're not necessarily the best filter of what is a successful thing. And sometimes it takes time to return to something to realize that it's like one of your best works or someone else's vision to really prop it up. So I think it's really tricky, because there's the practical issue of just storage, and then there's the reality that, like, not all work is consumed and appreciated in the time that makes sense for our lifetimes, and the practical nature of storage. But I guess my philosophy personally is I at a certain point decided I had enough stretcher bars to fill my space, and so I wasn't going to bring any new large stretcher bars in, and anything new that I wanted to make required me unstretching something old. So I kind of like made that negotiation for myself, where like I rolled up some old things, and then I decided like, okay, I have the number of works that can exist in this space without me feeling too crowded to make new work. That's like really the barometer for me, is like, if it's keeping me from making new work, then it has to leave. Or like if you're paying for storage that makes you have to work another job more, and then you can't paint. Like there's all of these kind of like mental gymnastics that we have to do as artists to survive. But I think my feeling is just like I need to make work to feel good as a human in the world. And so whatever allows me to keep making work is sort of the priority. And that might mean, setting some work aside, loaning work, unstretching things. But I try to kind of negotiate year by year, kind of do a check-in.
Well, you'll even see it in Van Gogh's work. Sometimes he paints on the opposite side of the painting.
I love that. Double painting.
So that's something. I think what you're referring to with de Kooning was when Rauschenberg erased the de Kooning. And
that's another one.
Oh, that's a different one. Okay.
No, but that's true. Artists. One of my first painting classes as a high school student, a teacher asked us all to go to somebody else's work in the room and draw a line through it. It was like part of the class was to kind of be comfortable destroying work, which it was painful as a young artist, but I think useful sometimes to let go. So I'll have to negotiate these things. I think that's a great question. I think it's great when you make a lot of work. I think then like the issue becomes editing, really, which is kind of nice, like you don't have to be so painstaking in your decisions and making. You can really just leave that till the end. So.
Now, Vermeer did not make a lot of paintings, but I've always used the barometer for an artist is how much do they output? And if you look, you mentioned Picasso, it's tens of thousands of works. And I think,
Right.
it's hard to put a definition of art, but I think an artist has to, in some odd way, put out lots and lots of work. To me, that's a sign. I have friends, they have sketchbook upon sketchbook filled with drawings, or yes, and it becomes too much. But I think, look at a chef. How many plates does he put out in a night of food and dishes? And I think an artist is similar. Obviously, Vermeer is not, and probably Caravaggio was not either. But I think it's important to produce lots of work. Editing.
So many different styles, of working and operating. Barbara's just added to the chat. I just had this conversation today. I have a folder of work to be destroyed, but I keep it in case I edited part of an intense part of her before death, but I keep it in case I change my mind. But it's not work that really makes it, in my opinion, but you never know. Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a personal choice, these things. But I do think
the time is a huge factor too. I have old work, you come back to it. That's like another whole thing. You see something so differently from 10 years ago. And if you have, the good fortune to have enough space, you can put things aside. I mean, an artist I've always worked in series, and I always have there's a lot of work around, but then you come back to something and you realize, boy, that really wasn't working at that time. And it's interesting to go back to previous older work as well. That's a whole other adventure.
Yeah, it really is. I had a teacher once suggest that, whatever you're getting rid of, you save at least one piece from every body of work. So you have that to kind of return to and reflect on, which I thought was a really nice suggestion.
Have you ever had a work where I've had like a couple that I sold and that's pretty rare. Most of the stuff, it's okay that it goes out, it gets sold and it leaves, goodbye. But I had a couple that I really today wish that I had not, only because they were pivotal. Do you ever think about that? There were pivotal pieces in your direction, and that you would like to just be able to look at that surface again, or do you ever have that experience, or just look at how you put that together in some way, shape, or form?
I think it's such a nice idea. I think the practicality of just wanting the work out in the world and out of my space reigns over any feelings of nostalgia at this moment in my career. But I feel like at some point I imagine I will feel those feelings again. But there's such a strong desire personally right now to have the work out in the world, and also for it to be experienced by a range of people. So I think.
Well, I wasn't thinking of it as a nostalgia thing. I just think because it was some kind of a turning point, and I'm only talking like two works in my time, because you generally have these series, and so you don't need to reference it ever again. Really.
I think it felt like, I guess the way I think of it is like when I have the opportunity to go back to something that I didn't expect to, it's usually a pleasure and such a gift. But I don't often long for it, because I think once it leaves, my brain has also left that space. But I think whenever I am encountering an older work by accident, usually it's pretty exciting to kind of have that moment of like, oh right, I forgot that I was there then, and this has really informed where I am now, and maybe even there's something I want to investigate further. I think that can be so amazing. I totally appreciate that feeling. Thank you all so much for does anyone have other questions? Oh, Corey's here. Hi, Corey.
Yeah. Hey, no questions. I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your artist talk and your paintings, and I really appreciate this. So it's really nice, and congrats.
Thank you. Corey's one of the good naked artists, and we're gonna have a show with him in February, so you should all look out for his work. I'm really excited. We have been working together for 2 years and have not yet met in person. This is one of the benefits of quarantine, is that we've been able to connect virtually the last 2 years, and it's really been amazing. So thanks.
for sure.
I don't doubt that Corey's a good naked artist, but he's obviously a good clothed artist as well. We can all see that. I want to thank everybody. And I think Rachel hit it off right at the beginning when she said, wow, I feel like I'm in a community. And I think, this is our 81st artist talk, and it's weekly. Maybe we've missed 2 or 3 when it was holidays. And, I'm reading Harari's book on sapiens, and the critical point of why Homo sapiens became the dominant, probably abusive animal on the planet is because we were able to cooperate on a large level, a large group level, and cooperate, oddly enough, through our mythology and our ideas and thoughts. And certainly somebody doesn't have to know you, Jaclyn, but they can look at your work and they can relate to it. And I don't know if any other animal can do that, although some birds build nests that are quite artful and purposely artful. So, we tend to isolate ourselves from the rest of the animals, but there's no question about it. We are a community, and we perform best when we support each other, when we applaud each other, and when we hear ideas, that everybody has to say, because, Jaclyn sees her art in one way, but when somebody says, maybe that's a staircase or an elevator, the viewer, beauty is not in the eye of the beholder, but the beholder has an eye, and it can inform the creator. There's no question about it. And so we're all serving an important function for Jaclyn, just as she is for us. We're many of us are painters. We see that brushwork. We see the line play. We see the elongated figure that's reminiscent of Picasso at a certain period of his work. And I particularly like how you describe titles. I was always against titles in painting for the reason you said. And I would often say, does a poem get a painting to go with it? But you said it very eloquently when you said, I don't want the title to pigeonhole a view of the painting, but I want the title to sit side by side, maybe open up a different doorway. And, it's obvious your work as a gallerist has informed your ability to see as an artist and to speak as an artist. And I would say to everybody here, getting art shows is really hard. Go ahead and form a gallery. That's a way. Form a collective, or just get involved in the process. Next thing you know, maybe you're not showing your own work. Most likely you're not, but you're a curator and you're honing a different eye and you're learning sort of the whole of being an artist. It's not just about painting. Thank you, Rachel, for giving Jaclyn a show, for being a part of this talk. Claps and snaps for everybody here. We're ATOA. Come join us next week. We have a very specific talk, a very interesting one titled Earth on the Edge, organized by Marcia Annenberg. Earth on the Edge, 12 artists declare a climate emergency at Ceres Gallery in New York City. Should be a sort of rapid fire presentation with about 12 of the artists coming. Thank you all for coming. So nice to see so many regulars, and have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us, Barry. It's such a pleasure. And thank you all for your lovely comments and thoughtful questions. It's really nice to see you all. Thanks, Rachel. See you all soon.
Thank you, Barry, too. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Bye-bye.
and thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy birthday. Jacqueline,
Bye. Thank you. Yes.
where did you go to high school?
Oh, in Los Angeles. I went
Yeah.
to a school. I went to a school called Milken. Do you know it?